On October 5, 2007, Beijing native Yang Jia was riding around the Shanghai district of Zhabei on a rented bike. The 27-year-old had been visiting Shanghai to enjoy China's National Day holiday and rented the bike for 50 yuan, around $6 to allow him to see more of the city. Around 8:30 in the evening, he was stopped at a police checkpoint and asked to show his identity card. There had been an increasing issue with bicycle theft around the city, so police checkpoints were set up on the streets in efforts to crack down on the problem. When requested to produce his identity card, Yang Jia refused, saying he wasn't carrying it with him, so police then asked if he had proof the bicycle was his, to which he said he didn't. As Yang Jia began arguing with police, a crowd gathered to watch the entertainment, and traffic began to back up along the street as the man from Beijing refused to cooperate, angering cyclists and drivers who just wanted to go about their business. What should have been a 2-minute interaction transformed into a 40-minute standoff, with Yang Jia becoming increasingly aggressive and belligerent, leading to officers arresting him under suspicion of theft and taking him to the local police station. He was held and interrogated for 6 hours before eventually proving his identity and showing a receipt confirming he rented the bike, after which he was released. 9 months later, on July 1, 2008, a fire broke out on the streets outside the same police station. Officers manning the front desk rushed out to deal with the blaze. As they tried to tackle the fire, they failed to notice Yang Jia, wearing a gas mask, walk past them and march towards the station's side entrance. Security guard Gu Jiaming was calling the fire brigade when Yang Jia entered the building and attacked him from behind. Gu Jiaming fell to the ground after being smashed over the head by Yang Jia with the blunt edge of the knife he was carrying. Intent on taking out years of pent-up anger he felt towards the police, Yang Jia quickly but calmly walked towards the duty room where 4 unarmed technical officers sat doing paperwork. The issues Yang Jia had with police began in the year 2000 when he was 20 years old, and stemmed from an incident involving his mother, Wang Jingmei. Born 1980 and raised in Beijing, the parents of Yang Jia divorced when he was 13 years old, his mother constantly accusing his father of cheating on her. Tired of the accusations, which inevitably turned into furious arguments, the father decided to end the marriage, which resulted in Wang Jingmei getting custody of their son. By all accounts, Wang Jingmei had a somewhat paranoid personality, which saw her often getting into conflicts with neighbors and colleagues. The disputes would sometimes go beyond insults being exchanged and turn physical. The matriarch of the family living opposite Wang Jingmei recalled one such incident when she was going to take out the rubbish after finishing dinner. She placed the garbage bag momentarily in the corridor as she put on her shoes. While she did, Wang Jingmei opened her own apartment's door, noticed the bag, and immediately began insulting the neighbors for making the building dirty. The neighbor explained that it was only for a moment, but that failed to satisfy Wang Jingmei, and the two got into a scuffle. The young Yang Jia heard this and came out to help his mother, and began violently kicking the neighbor's door until other residents calmed the situation. Another incident occurred with the family living in the room above the apartment of Wang Jingmei. Unhappy with the noise the family's young son made, Wang Jingmei responded by banging the heating pipes that ran through the apartments to show her displeasure. When that failed to lead to the level of quiet she wanted, she was witnessed throwing glass bottles up the stairs towards the family's door, the broken glass having to be swept up by the other neighbor on the floor. For her part, Wang Jingmei would later say that what the neighbors told the media about her were all lies designed to make her look bad, despite multiple residents of the building corroborating the stories. Yang Jia himself was said to be an introverted but stubborn child, who, like his mother, stood firm when he felt he'd been wronged. His performance at school wasn't quite good enough to attend university, so on graduating high school he took work in a supermarket. Wang Jingmei had worked for a state enterprise until the company shut down and she was laid off. This left her living off her state pension, so to earn some extra money she waitressed part-time. In the year 2000, while at work, she got into an argument with one of her colleagues which turned violent. It resulted with the colleague biting Wang Jingmei in the leg, leaving her needing hospital treatment for the wound. Wang Jingmei demanded compensation for the medical treatment she required, but the co-worker argued that she felt forced to defend herself when Wang Jingmei started the fight. To get what she felt she was owed, Wang Jingmei reported the incident to the police, but with no witnesses to the fight it was decided that the costs for the medical treatment would be split 50-50 between both parties. The decision failed to satisfy Wang Jingmei, and she initiated a civil suit to sue her colleague, all the while telling anyone who'd listened that the police were bullying her. The litigation rumbled on for the next 8 years, Wang Jingmei refusing to accept any ruling the courts made which failed to satisfy her demands, and was still ongoing the days before Yang Jia stormed into the police precinct wearing a gas mask, bottles of gasoline in his bag, and carrying a knife. Director of the Logistics Support Department, 47-year-old Ni Jingrong, failed to notice a man enter the duty room, then marched straight towards him. He barely had time to react as Yang Jia began his attack, plunging the knife into his chest and abdomen 3 times, leaving the officer with fatal injuries. The other 3 officers present, 56-year-old Zhang Yijie, 50-year-old Fang Fuxin, and 47-year-old Zhang Jianping, looked on stunned for a moment as their colleague was assaulted, before getting up and running to exit the room. Being unarmed, they were attempting to raise the alarm. However, Yang Jia quickly moved towards the officers and managed to slash the neck of instructor Zhang Yijie. As the officer fell to the floor, Yang Jia inflicted more wounds to the injured man, ending his life. Officers Fang Fuxin and Zhang Jianping tried to intervene, but both received multiple injuries from the knife of Yang Jia, which proved to be fatal. With the alarm being raised, Yang Jia moved to the station stairwell and began making his ascent to continue the rampage. With the money he earned while working at the supermarket, Yang Jia bought an expensive mountain bike, something he was extremely proud of. He enjoyed the outdoors and was a keen hiker, spending much of his free time hiking the mountains on the outskirts of Beijing, and the bike allowed him to explore further. However, after only a year of working at the supermarket, he was let go. It seemed he had trouble getting along with his colleagues, describing them as deceitful people, and after one conflict too many, the management fired him. He found employment elsewhere, but soon encountered similar problems, unable to get along with the people he worked with, believing he couldn't trust them. After this, he seemingly gave up on working, not bothering to look for a new job, and turning down an offer of employment from the manager of the residential community his home was located. Instead, he stayed home surfing the internet all day, his mother seemingly having no issues with it, even though their only income was the monthly 1,500 yuan, around $180 from her pension, and some alimony from her ex-husband. The only time he spent away from home was when he went out hiking. His internet history showed he was an active member of online groups that arranged hikes in various spots around the region. The bicycle, which was his pride and joy, eventually led to his own negative experience with the police. While out on a winter hike, the bike was stolen, leading to him walking for 6 hours in the snow to get back home. He reported the theft to the police, but quickly became frustrated when there was no progress with the case. Over the next few months, he frequently contacted the police to ask if they found his bike, but was always left disappointed. He began to feel, perhaps correctly, that the police weren't really putting much effort into tracking down his bike or the thief. This, combined with his mother's seemingly never-ending civil litigation, confirmed in his mind that his mother was correct when saying the authorities were victimizing them. Being physically fit from his hiking, Yang Jia had no problem quickly ascending the stairs to the 9th floor. Opening the fire door and looking into the corridor, he spotted 48-year-old traffic police inspector Xu Ya waiting to take the elevator to the 1st floor. Yang Jia rushed the officer and attacked him with the knife, injuring him multiple times, the officer later passing from the wounds. Yang Jia then returned to the stairwell and continued going up the building. Just as he reached the 10th floor, 27-year-old traffic police officer Wang Lingyun burst into the stairwell and met Yang Jia. Before he had time to react, Yang Jia attacked, causing the officer injuries to the shoulder and chest, before continuing up the stairs. Reaching the 11th floor, Yang Jia went into the corridor after seeing 49-year-old police inspector Li Ke exiting his office. The inspector tried to fight off his attacker, but received multiple knife wounds to the face, chest and abdomen, which resulted in his death. Once again, Yang Jia went back to the stairwell and continued going up, checking the corridors for potential targets on each floor, intent on taking more lives. A few months before his 6-hour detention in Shanghai, Yang Jia had another incident with the police, this time in the Shanxi province city Taiyuan, 480 kilometers southwest of Beijing. His mother had given him the money to take a trip to the city so he could spend a few days hiking the surrounding mountains. The incident occurred at the city's main train station, while he queued waiting to board his train back to Beijing. Throughout his childhood, his mother had drilled into him to be wary of thieves, and after the incident with his bike being stolen, he'd become increasingly paranoid about the possibility of someone stealing from him. As he stood in the queue waiting for the train, he wore his full backpack on his chest, but it caused him to continuously bump the people standing in front of him. He was asked by the people he bumped if he could hold the backpack in his hand rather than wearing it, but he bluntly refused. An argument broke out in the queue, which attracted the attention of police officers, who came over to try and smooth the situation. One of the officers eventually got into a verbal altercation with Yang Jia as he refused to take off his bag. Eventually, the argument turned into a physical confrontation, which resulted in Yang Jia receiving a punch to the face. The punch caused damage to his teeth, which required medical treatment. Yang Jia and his mother then made an official complaint about the incident, which resulted in them receiving an apology, the officer in question being suspended, and Yang Jia being rewarded 30,000 yuan, around $3,600 compensation. Despite his mother having financially supported him for the past 8 years while he refused to look for work, it appeared Yang Jia decided to keep the compensation money for himself. When he was later arrested, police found he was carrying 7,000 yuan in cash and had 20,000 yuan in his bank account. Yang Jia failed to find any more targets until he reached the police station's 21st floor. He saw 30-year-old Inspector Wu Yuhua waiting for the elevator and charged at him. The officer received a knife wound to the chest and was the only victim of Yang Jia who was involved in his October 5th detention. Recognizing the officer, instead of going back to the stairwell, Yang Jia walked into one of the offices on the corridor, hoping to find more men involved with the October 5th incident. Entering the office, Yang Jia was now outnumbered, and the unarmed officers attempted to subdue him. 31-year-old Inspector Li Wei received a knife wound to the face, while 49-year-old Supervisor Kong Zhongwei received an injury to his abdomen in the ensuing struggle. Ultimately, it took 7 officers to get Yang Jia under control and finally disarm him. As he was pinned down to the ground and handcuffed, Yang Jia announced that he was happy with the result of his rampage, and the officers could end his life now. In the 20 minutes that passed after Yang Jia entered the station, 6 officers, Ni Jingrong, Zhang Yijie, Zhang Jianping, Fang Fuxin, Xu Weiya, and Li Ke, had lost their lives, and a further 4, Wang Lingyun, Wu Yuhua, Li Wei, Kong Zhongwei, along with security guard Gu Jianming were injured, some of them severely. With absolutely no question over his guilt, the only thing interrogating officers wanted to know when questioning Yang Jia was his motive for the attack on the station. He told them it was in response to what he believed was the unjust treatment he'd been subject to after being detained October 5th the previous year, and that since the Shanghai police failed to satisfy his grievance, he decided to satisfy it himself. After being released from detention in the early hours of October 6, 2007, and returning to Beijing, he informed his mother about the experience. Somewhat predictably, she was angered to hear about her son being arrested, and over the following months, she and Yang Jia made endless calls and sent numerous emails to the Shanghai Public Security Bureau, complaining and demanding compensation. They wanted the arresting officers removed from duty, and reportedly asked for 10,000 yuan, around $1,200 for mental distress, and to recoup the money spent on the phone calls they made to complain. Wang Jingmei later denied asking for compensation, and claimed the reports they did were down to a misunderstanding when they met with Shanghai officers who came to Beijing in efforts to resolve the issue. At some point during their complaints, it was claimed that Yang Jia was beaten during his detention, something the Zhabei police officers strongly and obviously denied. Eventually, Yang Jia and his mother took their complaints to the Ministry of Public Security in Beijing, but months passed without an outcome they found satisfactory. The Zhabei police maintained that there was nothing unjust in their treatment of Yang Jia. They had both audio and video recordings of their interactions with Yang Jia, which seemed to prove he wasn't beaten. Furthermore, Yang Jia had made his own written record of what was said at the time, which made no mention of him being physically assaulted.
你这个纸板是，你为什么都不剪？你剪我一个，相互尊重一点。你不要说这个啊！你不要说这个，什么叫相互尊重？什么叫相互尊重？你说什么叫相互尊重？尊重什么？尊重什么？尊重。
The interrogating officers did admit that at one point they needed to tackle Yang Jia to the ground, after he aggressively raised his hands towards them, saying that was the only time they were physical with Yang Jia. Other issues with Yang Jia claiming he was beaten were what happened after his release, and the lack of any medical reports detailing his supposed injuries. After finally showing police the receipt proving he rented the bike, officers escorted him back to his hotel, which was only a short distance from the police station, and just hours later he had no problem catching his train back to Beijing. Yang Jia and Wang Jingmei alleged he was beaten by 7 or 8 officers during the detention, which would have likely caused extensive injuries. However, there were no hospital records showing he sought medical treatment even after he got back home. When police representatives from Shanghai visited Yang Jia to resolve the issue, it was claimed they offered to show him the video of his detention so he could point out the times he felt he was mistreated, but Yang Jia reportedly refused the offer. As the dispute continued with seemingly no resolution that Yang Jia and Wang Jingmei would find satisfactory in sight, it appeared Yang Jia decided to take matters into his own hands. On June 12, 2008, Yang Jia took a train to Shanghai and checked into the same hotel he used during his previous visit 9 months earlier. The hotel was one of the cheapest types of accommodation in the city, tucked away down the back streets of Shanghai. The room cost only 68 yuan per night, but Yang Jia negotiated it down to 40 yuan, around $5. Over the course of the next 2 weeks, he spent his time hanging around outside the police station, surveilling the building and watching the police officers' movements. He kept a keen eye out for the officers who previously detained him, looking for what time they got to work. On June 23, he returned to Beijing to pick up items ordered online, before returning to Shanghai 2 days later. He checked into another cheap hotel, this time much closer to the police station. A young couple renting the neighboring room said they rarely saw him during his stay. They would hear him leaving the room at around 6 in the morning and returning after midnight every day. He spent more time watching the police station, but also began preparing items to use in his assault. When he'd returned home, he picked up the gas mask along with several cans of mace. Now back in Shanghai, he bought a 20-centimeter-long boning knife from the nearby supermarket and visited a gas station where he purchased a canister of gasoline. He used the gasoline to fill glass drink bottles with reusable caps to make basic Molotov cocktails. Early in the morning of July 1st, carrying a satchel over his shoulder, Yang Jia checked out of the hotel telling the person behind the reception desk that he didn't need the room anymore and wouldn't be coming back. He then made the short walk to the Jiabei police station and stood outside waiting for the next few hours. During his time watching the station, he learned when the armed officers went out on duty, and times when there were relatively few officers inside. At 9:40 in the morning, Yang Jia walked towards the station, smashed some of the bottles of gasoline on the ground and attempted to light the liquid. His initial attempts failed, so he smashed one on a flower bed and eventually managed to get the fire going outside the station, which quickly caught the attention of the front desk officers. With the officers distracted, Yang Jia put on his gas mask and took the opportunity to walk into the building and begin his violent rampage around the station. It took little time for news of the attack on the precinct to spread across the city. The commotion around the station soon saw a large crowd gathering on the streets outside, which quickly caught the attention of the local media. When it emerged that a single individual walked into the station and ended the lives of 6 officers and injured a further 5, the reaction from many Shanghai residents was one of amusement. People were stunned that just one man could walk into a police station armed only with a knife, move around the station for 20 minutes and cause so much carnage. The Shanghai authorities defended the police working at the station, saying the majority of the people in the building at the time were older officers who largely worked on technical and logistical aspects of police work. Given the type of work they did, not many of the officers needed to carry firearms or other weapons to defend themselves. While most of the building was covered by security cameras, the stairwell wasn't, so after Yang Jia attacked the first victims and moved into the stairwell, in the panic the officers lost track of him. The first instinct for the other officers on the first floor was to try and save their stricken colleagues, and the alarm was sent out to officers on the higher floors to look for the suspect. However, believing it to be the faster option, most of the officers used the elevators rather than the stairs. The explanation did little to satisfy much of the public, who questioned the competency and fitness of the officers working at the precinct. When more information about Yang Jia was released, coverage from much of the state media outside Shanghai carried an unusually sympathetic tone, notably when it was announced his appointed lawyer Xie Yongming was also legal advisor to the Jiabei district government. It was pointed out that this appeared to be a conflict of interest and should not be allowed by the Shanghai authorities. However, Yang Jia had already rejected the defense lawyer hired by his father and agreed to let Xie Yongming represent him. The media questioned if Yang Jia was made aware of his lawyer's connections to the Jiabei authorities, and concerns about him receiving a fair trial were voiced. The sympathetic attitude displayed towards Yang Jia in the media outside of Shanghai was also shared by many among the general public, and was most noticeable online. Bloggers and people discussing the case in online forums portrayed him as an almost heroic figure, referring to Yang Jia as the Jiabei swordsman, who stood up for the weak and powerless. The claims Yang Jia was beaten when held in custody were treated as fact, and soon a blog post went viral saying that Yang Jia became infertile due to damage inflicted on his genitals during the assault. This stoked anger among supporters of Yang Jia, leading to the Shanghai authorities releasing the video and audio footage of the original detention to show he wasn't abused while in custody, but it failed to have the intended effect. At one point during the interrogation, Yang Jia was let out of the room for about 10 minutes, before being brought back. For those wanting to believe Yang Jia was beaten, this was the time when police attacked him. However, they ignored the fact Yang Jia appeared completely normal when he was returned to the room. The author of the blog post claiming Yang Jia had been left infertile thanks to police brutality was tracked down and detained, with the Jiabei police looking into the possibility of suing him for defamation. The young man responsible for the allegations, referred to with the pseudonym Jia Mo, admitted he didn't know Yang Jia and made up the story to get attention. However, since he hadn't named an individual officer when making his claim, the Jiabei police couldn't prosecute him. Regardless of the truth, many who had already made up their minds about the attack being in response to police brutality, any evidence to the contrary was ignored. Conspiracy theories about the case circulated across the internet, some suggesting Yang Jia was innocent and that it was a false flag incident. Despite the people spreading the false flag theory having little explanation as to what the Jiabei police were trying to achieve, the possibility that Yang Jia was just an innocent fall guy was promoted by some prominent figures, especially in the art world. However, this theory chose to ignore the facts that there was video footage of Yang Jia committing the crime. He was arrested attempting to injure several officers, and confessed to the assaults. On July 17, 2008, news emerged which would shift the focus on the case from Yang Jia to his mother Wang Jingmei. Family members reported to the media that they had been unable to contact Wang Jingmei for the previous 10 days, and that she'd seemingly disappeared. The news was welcomed by the supporters of Yang Jia and the conspiracy theorists, who pointed to it as proof something nefarious was going on. However, the lawyer representing Yang Jia, Xie Yongming, announced that he personally visited Wang Jingmei to ask for temporary power of attorney over her son while he handled the case. He showed the signed paperwork as proof of his statement, and added that Wang Jingmei was admitted to Beijing Ankang Hospital shortly after being informed of her son's arrest, and the crimes he was being accused of. The hospital specialized in drug rehabilitation and treating psychological conditions. According to the doctors treating her, Wang Jingmei became extremely emotionally unstable after being informed of her son's arrest, so to prevent her from harming herself or others, police took her to the hospital for treatment. She was diagnosed with an extreme personality disorder, but the doctors treating her wouldn't give further details. For the supporters of Yang Jia, this was more proof that some kind of conspiracy was taking place. However, once again they displayed willful ignorance to maintain their belief that Yang Jia was the wronged party. It's illegal for doctors to disclose an individual's mental health diagnosis without explicit consent from the patient. Even the courts cannot compel a doctor to disclose the information, unless the circumstances are exceptional. If a doctor breaks the strict patient confidentiality obligation, they will be heavily fined and likely lose their medical license. People either unaware or ignoring this claimed it was an attempt to silence Wang Jingmei, arguing that she was the only person who knew the full details of the complaints her son made against the Zhabei police. With focus now being placed on Wang Jingmei, reporters began looking into her own history, where details of her previous issues with the law emerged, along with more information which suggested hearing of her son's arrest could have pushed her over the edge. With her struggling financially on her monthly 1,500 yuan state pension, she applied to receive welfare payments from the government. However, with her living in government housing which was already paid for, receiving the state pension, and not being of retirement age, she wasn't eligible to receive financial aid. Furthermore, she lived with her adult son who had been unemployed for several years, making no effort to find work. She was told that if she was struggling financially, she or her son should find employment. Wang Jingmei claimed her ongoing attempts to sue her former colleague and taking care of her son left her unable to work full-time. It was discovered from interviews with family members and neighbors that Wang Jingmei did everything for Yang Jia. Despite being in his 20s, Yang Jia left all household responsibilities to his mother, while he either surfed the internet all day or went out hiking. If his mother didn't cook, he simply wouldn't eat, and when Wang Jingmei gave him money to take trips to other areas of the country, he never invited her along. The only thing he did to help his mother was typing out documents for her ongoing civil litigation. Just days before Yang Jia walked into the Zhabei police station armed with the knife, Wang Jingmei was informed the courts weren't going to accept any more attempts to sue her colleague. She had rejected a reasonable offer 8 years prior, and since then she failed to offer new evidence to support her case. According to family members, this infuriated Wang Jingmei, who felt once again she was being victimized. When the family members suggested it was only a small matter, and that maybe it was time she moved on with her life, she replied saying if she didn't make a big fuss about small matters they never get resolved. With her appearing to have a somewhat temperamental personality, many people felt that after being rejected for financial aid, the complaints against the Zhabei police and her former colleague not being resolved to her satisfaction, and then her son being arrested, likely caused her to have some sort of mental breakdown. Wang Jingmei later denied having any mental health problems, and claimed her being held in the hospital was entirely unjust. In her version of events, she claimed that on the evening of July 1st she returned home from the part-time job she recently started, to find an officer waiting outside her home. Thanks to the amount of time she spent talking to police about her various complaints and petitions, she was familiar with the officer and immediately told him she'd done nothing wrong. The officer was joined by 2 plainclothes police, and they informed her Yang Jia had been arrested for a serious crime in Shanghai. Before being told what the offense was, Wang Jingmei immediately declared her son's innocence, and said that Shanghai police were framing him. She was then shown a warrant allowing the officers to search the bedroom of Yang Jia, which she attempted to dispute, and became, in her words, very emotional. She was then taken to the local police station to wait for inspectors from Shanghai who wanted to question her about Yang Jia. Again, she said that at several points during her time in the station she became very emotional and was in an especially bad mood, but didn't go into detail about what she did when in the emotional state. After several emotional outbursts, she then found herself being transported to the hospital, but claimed she wasn't told where she was being taken. Ultimately, she spent 143 days receiving treatment before being discharged. She later went on to give multiple interviews to supporters of her son, claiming her time in the hospital was an attempt to silence her, apparently efforts to prevent her from providing evidence proving her son's actions were justified. What evidence she had that could justify her son ending the lives of 6 police officers and injuring 5 more was never explained. The only thing she offered was the claim Yang Jia was beaten during the previous detention, information that was already public knowledge and had no proof to support it. The question of possible mental health issues then moved on to Yang Jia while he waited for the trial. Family members claimed that Wang Jingmei had previously spoken of being concerned about her son's mental health during his teens. She allegedly wanted to send him to a psychologist, but lacked the money to do so. Supporters of Yang Jia argued that if it was proven he suffered from severe mental health issues, he should be acquitted of all charges and receive treatment. However, Yang Jia underwent psychiatric evaluation shortly after his arrest. The doctors from the Institute of Forensic Science found him mentally competent to stand trial and bear full criminal responsibility for his actions. With video evidence of Yang Jia committing the crimes, his being arrested at the scene while attacking other officers, and his confession, the trial was set to take place on July 29, 2008. At the last minute the trial would be postponed. The 2008 Olympic Games was about to begin in Beijing, so it was decided to delay the trial until the event finished. Yang Jia eventually appeared in court on September 1, with him being found guilty of 6 counts of intentional homicide, among various other charges, and he was handed the death penalty. During his appearance in court, he chose to say little in his own defense, but stated he intended to appeal the verdict. On September 12 his appeal was accepted, and he was granted a second trial. With the controversy over Xie Yongming being appointed as his defense lawyer for the first trial, for his appeal a different lawyer was hired to represent him. Zhai Jian was an experienced and highly respected criminal defense lawyer in Shanghai, and his appointment was widely celebrated by supporters of Yang Jia. The appeal was heard on October 13, 2008. Zhai Jian focused the defense on investigating the claims of police brutality against Yang Jia and raising questions about his client's mental state. This time Yang Jia spoke in his own defense. He continued to claim he was beaten while in custody, but when asked to explain the lack of medical records detailing the injuries, he said he only suffered bruising to his arms and back. To put some of the rumors to bed, prosecutors inquired if he had any issues with his genitals. He strongly denied having any problems in that area, and seemed both confused and offended that his manhood was being questioned. The defense team couldn't provide any new evidence to prove Yang Jia was beaten, perhaps most tellingly failing to find any friends or other people close to the defendant with whom he'd spoken about the incident to corroborate the claims. Zhai Jian then attempted to question his client's psychiatric evaluation. He requested Yang Jia be evaluated again by doctors of his choosing, but the request would be rejected after the physicians who assessed the mental health of Yang Jia gave detailed testimony of how they reached their conclusions. While evaluating him, they came to the conclusion that the reason for his rampage was due to his rented bike being confiscated after he refused to show police the receipt, proving he paid to use it. Yang Jia had developed and held an extremely strong hatred towards bicycle thieves after the experience of his own bike being stolen and the failure of police to recover it. He believed that since he'd paid to use the bike, when police confiscated it they were essentially stealing from him, and he wanted them punished for that. When Yang Jia was questioned by the prosecution, he was shown the video of his rampage around the station. The first trial had been criticized for being closed to the public, so in response the appeal hearing was opened up, and was attended by 130 spectators. This meant it was the first time people were able to see footage of the assault, and it changed the opinion of many of those who had turned up to support Yang Jia. Being questioned while watching the footage, Yang Jia had little to say in his defense other than claiming he couldn't remember the incident clearly, and that he was surprised he was so successful. Asked if he felt any regrets or guilt for his actions, he responded saying no regrets, no guilt, and that his victims weren't innocent. Ultimately, the appeal against the death sentence was rejected, and the punishment was upheld. Naturally, those who still supported Yang Jia reacted angrily to the verdict, and having previously celebrated Zhai Jian being hired to represent Yang Jia, now blamed him for losing the case, and very carefully alluded to him being corrupt. In truth, there was little more Zhai Jian could have done. Despite claims from his supporters, the evidence against Yang Jia was overwhelming, and the continued support for him pointed to people having hidden agendas for lending that support. On November 21, 2008, China's Supreme Court approved the final verdict and announced the execution would take place within 7 days. On November 26, 2008, Yang Jia was executed by lethal injection. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a like, leaving a comment, and subscribing to the channel. And hope to see you again for the next dark tale from the Middle Kingdom.